We work as fractional CFOs for small to mid-sized businesses. We give them the same senior financial advice that large companies get from a full-time CFO. And in addition, we do QuickBooks bookkeeping and executive search with a lifetime guarantee. So if you'd like to know more about our service offerings, please reach out to me or to my assistant, Amy, or you can certainly take a look at our website, www.cfosimplified.com. So with that being said, let's get on with the presentation. We'll have questions at the end of the presentation, as long as we have time for it. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions after the presentation is over. If you do have questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat box at the bottom, and Amy will get those questions and will either interrupt me or forward them to me so that we can address them at the right time. So first of all, please understand that this is not intended to be a definitive answer to all issues relating to the PPP. It's a very complex law, and this is just really an overview of the law with the changes that have been recently enacted. New changes and guidance are coming from the SBA almost on a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times a week. So be sure to keep your eyes and ears open for new information, and we will continue to send out updates to you to make sure that you are abreast of everything that's going on. So we're going to be talking today about the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the Paycheck Flexibility Act of 2020, which was signed into law on June 5th. So feel free to ask questions. If there's something that you have a question about, just ask, because I guarantee you that you're not the only one asking that question or having that question in their minds. You can use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and we'll answer as many as we can during this session. And also remember that I'm around. All of you have my contact information, so if you have questions later, please feel free to reach out to me. In fact, some of you have already contacted me already, and I have appreciated the opportunity to visit with each one of you. So here are the issues that we're going to be addressing today. How can I use the Paycheck Protection Program funds? What are the things that I can spend the money on? And does how I spend the money affect my chances for forgiveness? What is the PPP forgiveness process? How difficult is the form to fill out? Who do I send the form to when I'm done filling it out? And how long does it take to get an answer back from the SBA on whether my loan has been forgiven or not? People have asked that they've received both an EIDL, an Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program grant, and a PPP loan, and can they use both of them? And then what is the overall impact on getting both of those? And then there's always the questions on hiring back staff. Do you have to hire all of your staff back? And what if they don't want to come back? Is there a specific amount that you need to pay them? And what happens if you pay them less, or if you don't hire them back at all? And then a final thing that we can address is, when can you use the money? Is there a time limit on spending the money from the PPP program? And what happens if you don't spend it all? So let's talk first about how you can use the funds that you got from the PPP program. So how can or might we use those funds that we've received? Well, I've been told by business owners, I have greater needs right now than just my payroll. So what happens if I don't use the loan to cover my payroll? Well, here I think the primary issue is the one of forgiveness. This is a loan from the SBA. You can actually use the money any way you want. It's just that if you don't follow certain guidelines, you won't get the loan forgiven. Now, under the new revised guidelines, you can use up to 40% of the money that you get for non-payroll purposes. It used to be 25%. Now it's 40%. But you must spend at least 60% of the PPP money for payroll in order to be eligible for 100% forgiveness. If you spend less than 60% for payroll, your forgiveness is going to be reduced on the non-payroll items until your payroll forgiveness reaches 60% of the total amount forgiven. And there are examples of this, and I can explain that in detail to anybody who has a question on that. But the government is not going to give you 100% forgiveness if you haven't used at least 60% of your money for payroll. But now, even if your expenditures don't follow strict guidelines, your loan still may be forgiven. It's just that a smaller portion of the loan is going to be forgiven, not full 100%. Now, a business owner told me, he said, hey, look, I don't have anything for my people to do now. Should I hire them back anyway? What happens if I don't? Well, keep in mind what the purpose of the PPP was, the Payroll Protection Program. The purpose was to provide funds for payroll for your employees. In spite of the fact that there may not be work for them to do, if you don't hire them back, then there's a likelihood that your loan won't be forgiven or your forgiveness could be reduced. And remember that since the government gave you this money to cover payroll and they're going to forgive the loan if you do pay your employees, there's really no loss for you in hiring your people back and paying them the salaries that they were getting as part of the PPP loan proceeds, because you're going to get them forgiven. So how is the loan structured? Well, the maturity of the loan used to be set at 2 years, which means that if you didn't get it forgiven, you'd have 2 years to pay the loan back. Well, with the new loan, the Flexibility Act, that has been extended to 5 years. Now, the interest rate is still at a 1% fixed rate. There's no collateral required. There's no personal guarantee required. And there is a deferral period. So any loan payments are deferred until after the bank receives the forgiveness report back from the SBA, or 10 months after the disbursement of loan proceeds, if there's no forgiveness requested. So if you got the loan money the beginning of April, let's say, you have 10 months from the beginning of April, even if you don't apply for forgiveness, to be able to defer the payment of any payments on the loan. But remember that during that deferral period, interest is still accruing. Now, that means that you'll still be paying interest on it for the amount of the loan that is not forgiven. But if your loan is forgiven, all of that interest that has been accrued during that deferral period will be forgiven as well. And also, there are no prepayment penalties or fees. So I've told my clients, if there's only one thing better than being able to borrow money at a 1% interest rate, what is that? Well, it's not having to pay back the loan at all. So the forgiveness aspect of the PPP is what I consider the most important part of this law. You get money from the government to run your business, and if you follow the guidelines, you don't have to pay it back. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think it gets any better than that. So that's what's important to me, is the forgiveness aspect of this. So how do you make sure that the loan that you've gotten is forgiven? Well, here are 3 questions that nearly everybody asks about forgiveness. And so I'm going to give you the answers to each one of them. What are the rules on spending the money? How might forgiveness be reduced? And what are the records that I need to keep? Well, here are the basic rules for forgiveness. Remember, first of all, that it's the lender that determines forgiveness, not the SBA. So if you have any questions, it's your bank that you should talk to, not contact the SBA directly. But of course, the bank has to operate within the guidelines of the SBA. So to be forgiven, the money must be spent during a specific period of time, and they've changed that time lately. But additionally, there are 2 pools of forgivable money. The first is for payroll and payroll-related expenses. And the second thing is non-payroll or overhead expenses. So what is that timeline? Well, all expenditures must be made within 24 weeks after loan disbursement. Now, in the original loan law, the PPP law, that was 8 weeks, and they've just recently extended that to 24 weeks. Now, day 1, that first day, is the date that the funds were deposited in your account. Day 168, 24 weeks later, is the last day that expenses can be considered for forgiveness. Any expenses that you've paid on day 169, I'm sorry, they're not included. But if your loan was dispersed before June 5th, you can choose to have your loan forgiveness coverage period be 8 weeks instead of 24 weeks. Day 1 is the day, again, that the funds were deposited in your account, and day 56 is the last day that those expenses can be considered for forgiveness. So just as everything else, there are always exceptions. So here's an exception. Many companies delay payroll for processing. So for instance, they may end a payroll date 1 week before they actually want payroll so that they have time to process it and time to confirm the hours that their employees have worked. So if that's the case, payroll dates can be shifted so that you can use either the date in which the payroll was paid during the covered period or the dates in which the payroll expense was incurred during the covered period, as long as it's paid on the next available date. Now, if you choose to use the incurred period, you still have a 24-week window in which you need to consider those payments or the inclusion of those payroll expenses. But non-payroll expenses must still be paid within the 24-week window of which it was actually incurred, not when it was actually paid. You don't have the opportunity to shift that time period like you did with payroll. That is, unless you elect to use the 8-week loan forgiveness covered period that was originally issued as part of the original loan program. Now, one other thing that you need to know is that there are now 2 forgiveness applications. In simple terms, you can use the EZ form if either you're an independent contractor with no employees, or you didn't reduce the wages of your employees by more than 25%, and you didn't reduce the number of employees that you had beyond what you had during that set period of documentation. Or you didn't reduce the wages of your employees more than 25%, and you weren't able to operate at the same level of activity as before February 15th due to the guidances of the Health and Human Services Agency, the HHS. It's going to take some real time to collect the data and fill out these worksheets, so don't wait until the last minute to do it. You can start collecting the information that you need when you start spending the PPP money. Fill out the worksheets and use the information to fill out the forgiveness calculation form, which is part of the application. And when you get done, submit the forgiveness application to your lender. Many lenders will be using electronic applications like they did for the loan applications itself. And with the number of changes that have been coming down, none of the electronic applications that I'm aware of are online yet. Your bank will let you know when those are available. So compensation for each employee cannot exceed $15,385 per employee during the 24-week PPP period. Now this equates to $100,000 of annualized income, and it includes wages, commissions, tips, and bonuses. Now for owners who are not on the payroll protection program and for owners that are not on the payroll plan at your company and receiving a regular paycheck and are a flow-through S corporation where you're taking a draw on the earnings of your company rather than getting a paycheck, there is a way of calculating your compensation. You calculate it by taking 8 weeks of your company's net income from the Schedule C of your 2019 return, and that is used as part of your forgiveness application. But in any case, it still can't exceed the $100,000 cap. Now, there are other payroll-related expenses that are also forgivable. Payroll payments for employer payments, such as bonuses, commissions, or hazard pay. Vacation pay, sick leave, or family leave are all considered as part of payroll-related expenses. Employer contributions for group healthcare coverage. Employer payments for employee retirement plans. For instance, if you contribute to your employees' 401k plan or pension or an IRA, your contribution is also considered. And as a matter of fact, if your contribution is made at the end of the year, you can still take that pro rata during the period of the covered payroll. And also state and local taxes on payroll are also considered as other payroll-related expenses. Remember, your forgiveness is based on a very simple ratio. 60% of the money needs to go for payroll or payroll-related expenses. 40% of your money can go for non-payroll expenses. And there's a reason why they've called it the Payroll Protection Program. They want the money primarily used for payroll, not for your company's operations expenses. So those Payroll expenses include those non-payroll expenses include mortgage interest, but not principal, for mortgages that were started before February 15th of 2020. Rent or leasing payments for a business that had a lease in force before February 15th, 2020, and also utility payments for electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or even internet access, for which service began before, and you guessed it, February 15th, 2020. But you can't include non-payroll expenses for such things as advance payments for interest on your mortgages or advance payments on other non-payroll related expenses. So here are some ways in which your forgiveness might be reduced. Your forgiveness could be reduced if you reduced your full-time employees following February 15th, unless you restored them to employment in your company by December 31st. Now this relates to a reference period, and you get to pick the reference period that works best for you. One reference period is either February 15th through June 30th of 2019, or January 1st through February 29th of 2020. Either of those are used as a reference period in terms of determining what your set FTE count is. Now, if you're a seasonal employer, you can either use either of those two dates, February 15th through June 30th of 2019, or January 1st through February 29th of 2020, or you can also use May 1st of 2019 through September 15th of 2019 if you're a seasonal employer. Now, your forgiveness might be reduced if you reduced your salaries by more than 25% unless you restore them to full salary by December 31st. Now, the percentage of any of those reductions may result in the same percentage reduction in the forgiveness that you get from the SBA. So these are the records that you need to keep in hand to be able to fill out the forgiveness application. What you need to do is be able to document your payroll. So one way of doing that is to have your bank account statement or your third-party payroll reports that show you withdrawals for payroll out of your bank account. Secondly, you could use your tax forms or third-party payroll reports showing the tax payments to the Treasury. Or you could also use your payment receipts for insurance or retirement plan payments that you're making. All three of those are documentation that you will need to be able to apply for forgiveness. For non-payroll expenses, you will want to be able to use your business mortgage interest payments, but remember that the mortgage must have been in place before February 15th of 2020. And to do that, you'll want to have an amortization schedule on your mortgage to determine the actual interest payments, because they're not going to allow you to deduct any principal payments on that loan. Additionally, you'll be able to show documentation on your business rent or lease payments. And if you deduct for a home office, you have to have done that starting in 2019. You can't start doing it now or start deducting the cost of working from home during COVID. You have to be able to show that you've used a home office during 2019. And also you have to have receipts or documentation proving that you made your business utility payments, including electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or internet access. Now, how do you document the number of full-time employees that you've had? Well, you have to do two things. First, you have to have documentation showing the number of FTEs that you had during the reference period that you've chosen to use, either February 15th to June 30th of 2019 or January 1st to February 29th of 2020. And you can document this by being able to provide payroll tax filings, state filings, or your unemployment filings for the payroll period under the PPP. You should also send in your application for forgiveness as soon as you can, but there's no definite guidance on this yet. Although I've read some things that have said that you should probably be able to provide that within 10 months after the end of your payroll period or your payment period. So if that's 24 weeks, it would be 10 months following the end of that 24-week period. But that guidance is still changing, so keep your eyes and ears open for what a final ruling may be on that. So let's say you got both the PPP loan and an EIDL grant. Can you keep both of them? Well, actually, no, you can't. The EIDL grant is deducted from your PPP forgiveness application. So the reality is that it's not a matter of that you can't keep both of them. The question is that you can't keep the EIDL grant and still get full forgiveness for your PPP. Because if you did get an EIDL loan or an EIDL grant from the SBA, you're going to have a line on the PPP forgiveness application that lists whether you got an EIDL grant and subtracts that from the PPP forgiveness. In fact, I've read that there is currently a guidance that if you got an EIDL loan from the SBA, you can change that to a PPP loan so you can take advantage of a reduction in interest rate. And if you're interested in that situation, please feel free to talk directly to your lender to work out the arrangements on that. So how long does it take for you to wait on pins and needles waiting to find out whether your loan was forgiven? Well, expect to be notified within 60 days following when you've submitted your forgiveness application. That's what's written into the SBA guidance right now. And the SBA will inform the bank within that 60-day term, and then they will pass the information on directly to you. So I'm sure everybody's heard about the fact that there are going to be audits to certify need. Well, the SBA has declared that they will review loans in excess of $2 million for an economic need certification. Now, what do they consider an economic need? Well, there's two critical certifications. The first is that the current economic uncertainty makes the loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. Or secondly, the funds will be used to retain workers and maintain payroll or make mortgage interest payments, lease payments, and utility payments as specified under the Paycheck Protection Program rule. Now, the SBA can review any forgiveness application for accuracy. So how do we prepare for a potential audit to assess our true need? Well, there's really no guidance on this at all, but certainly being able to provide reports showing the working capital needs, the cash flow needs of your business, the amount of available cash available through either collection of your accounts receivable or through the company's line of credit, all of that is going to be helpful as well in providing that documentation. But there are also uncertainties in any of this. Think of this, of your accounts receivable that's currently outstanding that you expect to collect, how much of that is going to be at risk because your customers aren't going to be able to pay their bills? And what about your ongoing operations? How much additional cash are you going to need because your sales have dropped and you need additional money to cover your overhead expenses, including the payroll costs that are not covered after the PPP money is used? Right now, this is uncharted territory, and the best thing that you can do right now is have a full understanding of the cash needs of your business and the funds that you have available to serve them. So what is the chance that you're going to get audited for need? Well, really, nobody knows. Since this is new territory, we're all in the dark. But I'll tell you this, if you borrowed less than $2 million, I really don't think you have anything to worry about. If you borrowed more than $2 million, I think there's a good chance that you may be audited. And then in that case, you should have a really good idea of what your cash flow needs are for the next 6 months so that you can show them that you needed the PPP loan. But at this point, there's really no guidance on that. So what happens if you need help? Well, to be honest with you, I think you need to understand what your current status is more than anything else. You need to talk to your lender and make sure that they can give you the information you need to go forward. I found from experience that truly the relationship managers and even the branch managers at the various banks don't really have the information needed to be able to give you answers. Your best bet is to find an executive at your bank that can go and get the information and provide it to you. if you don't know an executive, and I mean a senior vice president at the bank that you work with, the best thing you can do is ask your relationship manager who an executive, who a senior vice president might be that you can talk to, or you could even search for them on LinkedIn. So what's actually happening? Well, I can give you two stories that show how important this is. In the first case, a client of ours had wanted to make sure that they got their loan, their PPP loan promptly because they knew they were going to need it almost immediately. They were with Chase Bank. The CFO had a relationship with an executive vice president at Chase, and as soon as they submitted their loan application on Friday, right after the loan applications were first opened for acceptance, he called the senior vice president, the executive VP, and asked for some help in getting this processed. The executive VP took that loan application, put it at the top of the pile, and told his people to start processing that right away. On Tuesday of the following week, they got the money in their account. So they got their money literally within 2 business days following their submitting the application. And that was strictly because they knew somebody in a position of power. In my case, I bank at PNC Bank, and I submitted my application, found out that the application had been accepted, and was waiting for them to approve my loan. Now, I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks, nothing at all. And I finally called a senior VP that I know at PNC, and she said she would take a look at it for me. It was less than 24 hours later that I got a notification from another senior VP who is processing the loans out east, telling me that my loan had been accepted and that it was submitted right before the SBA completed their funding on the first round. And I got my funding literally 48 hours later. So it's important to know somebody and to be in a position where you can ask them for help. So we've all been working hard, working with this stuff for the PPP, trying to understand what the needs are. Wouldn't it be nice if we had an easy button? Well, think about it. Since March 15th, we've all had 90 days of uncertainty and stress. And what if you could get someone to give you some guidance and some help on some of these tough decisions that you have to make? Where could you turn for that assistance? And who could you ask for help that you lack in experience and knowledge? Well, to be honest with you, we are here to help you. So we're making a special offer to any business owner that needs some help. We're offering a full 8-hour day with one of our staff CFOs to do whatever you might need. We can help develop a detailed plan together to prepare for reopening your business. We can create a strategic financial plan for you, focusing on changes that are necessary in your business by the COVID pandemic. We can develop a profitability analysis of products, adjusting for new delivery methods. We can assemble a lender presentation for you describing what funding needs you currently have. We can help you prep your PPP forgiveness application. We can develop a cash flow forecast for you over the next 6 months. These are things that we've done for other clients of ours and people who've asked for help who aren't clients. And this is all with no strings attached, no commitments. It's just some assistance to help you get your business back on the road to recovery after the problems of this pandemic. So just give us a call, send me an email, talk to Amy, or go to our website and ask for the assistance. So right now, are there any questions? You've been patient for the last half hour.
We do have about 7 questions. The first one that was asked was from Eric Hessler. I have his sound on. I don't know if he wants to ask. Otherwise, I have it here. He wants to know about the tax implication of the PPP. Are the funds taxable? Do we have the ability to determine what tax year the payment is made?
There is some really specific guidance on that. And quite honestly, I don't have that directly in front of me, but I will certainly pull up that information and give it to you. I know that the loan proceeds are not taxable, but the expenses, I mean, they're not taxable as income, but the expenses are not deductible either if they're part of the forgiveness program. So that would be considered double dipping, getting free money and still deducting the expenses. So there is some very specific guidance on that, and I can pull up some information on that and get that to you. But the rough guidance is that the proceeds are not taxable as income, but the expenses are not deductible as expense either.
Okay. Another question we had was, why would one choose an 8-week period versus 24? And if you choose the 8-week period, is the 60/40 still applies?
Yes, the 60/40 does still apply. And I think the difference between using the 8-week and the 24-week period is that if you're spending the money within the 8-week period, why would you want to wait until the end of 24 weeks to apply for forgiveness? Because the situation is that you're not allowed to submit for the forgiveness until after the period, the covered period is over. So if you decide to wait for that 24 weeks, then you're sitting here waiting for the approval for forgiveness for that much longer and the accrued interest that's going to apply in that period of time, even though the payments are going to be deferred. So if you get all of your expenses done during that 8-week period, then I don't see any sense in truly waiting.
Okay. Another one said, just to clarify, there is no due date for the forgiveness paperwork yet?
No, at this point, there really isn't. I heard one guidance saying 10 months after completion of the final forgiveness period, which would be 10 months after the 24-week period is over. But I haven't seen any firm guidance on that yet.
Okay. Another question from Anna is, if we reduced the number of employees and reporting on PPP usage in July, how does restoring to the original number of employees by December 31st play any role in calculating the forgiveness?
Well, I have to tell you, Anna, that I agree with you. That's one of the conflicting things that I've seen within the program. And so my suggestion would be is that if you were going to apply for forgiveness, I would wait until you have plans to restore your employees at some point in time, but not right now. I would wait until you complete that hiring before you submit for your forgiveness, or you won't be able to change your forgiveness application after you've hired those additional people. So that's one reason to wait until the 24 weeks. If you have hired all of your people back and you spent your money within the 8-week period, then I don't see any reason to wait to submit your forgiveness application. But if you're planning on hiring people in August and September and November, and finally getting back to full employment in December, I certainly wouldn't submit an application at the end of the 8 weeks. I would wait until the end of the 24 weeks to be able to do it, or you're going to lose out on the forgiveness aspect of it.
Okay, we have a couple that kind of piggyback on each other. One is about, if my payroll is the full $15,385, can I add health insurance payments to that amount? I am a sole employee of my corporation. Can I add the state and local taxes on top of that amount?
Yes, state and local taxes can be added to that amount. That is on top of the $15,385. The same thing with health insurance payments. That's on top of the $15,385. But you have to understand one other thing, and that is that if you didn't include those amounts in your original PPP application for a loan, then there's no way you're going to be able to get additional money. All we're doing at this point is doing a calculation for forgiveness, not doing a calculation to get additional money. If you have applied for a PPP loan and you've gotten that loan, there's no way of going in and saying, oops, I made a mistake. Instead of asking for $100,000, I really wanted to ask for $150,000 because now I understand that I could get mortgage interest and health insurance and all these other things, and I rushed through it and I didn't get all that included the first time. I'm sorry, but from everything I've seen, you're out of luck. What you need to do is just be able to apply for forgiveness for the amounts that you have gotten from the government on the initial request.
And then they asked, when it comes to medical plans, do ancillary plans like dental and vision, are those included?
Yes, from what I have not seen anything at this point that says that health is separate from dental and vision. I think that's all part of a benefits package, and that's all part of a benefits package that's included in the guidance from what I've seen at this point.
Okay. I know we're at a little after 11:30, but we do have 2 more questions that just came in. It says, can you lay off employees after applying the PPP forgiveness or after 24 weeks?
I guess that's an interesting question. And I think what I will tell you is this, and that is that the application for forgiveness is submitted, and there's nothing that I have seen that says that there's going to be a look back on further activity with the company after the application has been submitted. So I guess if you want to look at it from that perspective, once you've submitted your application, I think you can do pretty much anything you want. That the government isn't going to put any restrictions on what you can do to run your business after that.
Okay. And then it says, how is the FTE count determined, as some of my staff was always part-time, including pre-COVID? Is it a true test of full-time to determine the number of employees, or is it really based on actual headcount, which I have restored to pre-COVID numbers?
Yeah, there's some interesting guidance on this, because originally they did calculations based on hours and added up the hours of part-time employees. And since then, they've come up with other guidance that, somebody over half-time is considered full-time, somebody less than half-time, but still working is considered half-time. There have been a couple of different things on that, and I'd be more than happy to look into that a little further and give you a little more detail on that. I'm not sure what the latest guidance on that is, but they're really looking at full-time equivalent employees. So if you have multiple half-time employees, those people added together could come up to a full-time employee, but they're not looking for actual head count. They're looking for full-time employee equivalents.
Okay, if one chooses the 24 weeks, do you have to maintain the same number the whole period?
I don't think so, because what they're doing is they're suggesting that you need to be able to maintain that or restore that FTE count by the end of December. And so obviously there's a situation where you're going to be adding people during a period of time. So you're not going to have the same number of people in June and July that you would have in September and October. What they're asking is that you restore those people by the time December comes along, the end of December. And I really haven't seen anything that relates to how many days you need to have those people working to have them be equivalent. So I'm not sure exactly what that, how that relates. I think there's probably going to be additional guidance on that coming forward.
Okay. What if you have an income that offsets sub-S Corp pass-through in excess of PPP loan?
Yeah, you're restricted to $100,000 of income. So whether you're a business owner that takes more than $100,000 of net earnings, or if you're an employee that's being paid more than $100,000, you can only borrow as part of the PPP loan up to an equivalent of $100,000 of annual income. And for the purposes of forgiveness, you can only ask for forgiveness for the equivalent of $100,000 of annual income. So it doesn't make any difference whether you made $105,000, $150,000, or $250,000, and whether you can document that as corporate earnings on a pass-through. The fact remains that they will only allow you to take $100,000 of equivalent income.
It looks like we have one more, but it's kind of a detailed question. We have received 1.2 million and have spent 996,000, and my 8-week period ended yesterday. Seems to make sense to spend 100% funds on qualified expenses and go for the 24-week forgiveness, correct?
If you're looking for 100% forgiveness, and during that period you can push your payroll up to 60% of what that loan is that you got, then absolutely I would take the 24 weeks and take it from that perspective without question. As I said earlier, I think the key here is to be able to use that money and get as much forgiveness as you possibly can. Now, certainly there are companies that are really in dire financial straits and need the money to be able to cover operating overhead. And in those cases, forgiveness is not an issue. It's survival that's the issue. So, that in those cases, the business owner, I think, needs to really think seriously about what's most important to them. And in certain instances, the money may be more important to be able to cover overhead expenses for survival. In other cases, the forgiveness is going to be a more important thing. But in that case, I certainly would take the 24 weeks and use that to balance out my payments. But, make sure that your payroll payments are 60%, because if it's not, there will be a reduction in forgiveness until you get to that 60% point. That's literally laid out in the guidance, and they even have examples of exact dollars in the guidance that they've laid out so that people understand there's no question about that.
And somebody asked, what if people leave for another job and you don't replace the position?
Yeah, you know, there's an interesting guidance on that that literally relates to a couple of things. One, if employees don't take a job that you've offered to them. And second, if you can't find people. Let's say you've gone out to find people and they're just not available. That's not an issue. There is what they consider a safe harbor in that regard. And if you can show that those people have either refused jobs that you've offered them, or if they have left your company to take another job, I think you can show a letter of resignation or something like that that would give documentation on the fact that you had them, but they're not there any longer. And that would provide sufficient documentation to provide for you to be able to fall under that safe harbor provision.
I think I have one I missed here. Just a moment. So the new 24-week period guidelines, can we select a period between 8 and 24 weeks, say 12, for example, and then submit the forgiveness?
No, you've got two choices here. You've either got 8 weeks or you've got 24 weeks. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to spend the money over 24 weeks. I mean, if you finish spending it at the end of 12 weeks, that's fine. You can stop there. I mean, there's no more money to spend. You've spent it all. But I think the issue is that you really can't submit your forgiveness application until after that 24-week period is over.
Okay, I think that's, you just answered. So even though we have the 24 weeks for forgiveness, the payroll per employee is still limited to the 8 weeks of payments of 15,385 max, right?
Yes,
Okay.
the limit is still that 15,385 per employee. So it's one of those funny things, you know, in my particular case, I did get a PPP loan. I started paying my employees, you know, as soon as I got the money. There was an 8-week limit that I had. I spent most of my money within that first 6 weeks. And now with 2 weeks left to go, you know, they've extended this for out to 24 weeks. Does it make sense for me to take that last 2 weeks worth of payroll and stretch it out over the next 15 weeks for my employees? No, it doesn't. So that's something to consider with that. Well, I think what they're considering with the 24 weeks, quite honestly, is for companies like restaurants who've been closed all this time. They may have gotten PPP loans, but they haven't had any opportunity to be able to use that money because they've been shut down totally over the last 8 weeks. So this has provided them with an opportunity to be able to use that money starting, let's say now in mid-June or at the end of June, and still having a period of time to be able to support their business during that up to the 24-week period, paying for their employees.
Looks like we've answered all the questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for attending and for being part of this. I look forward to the opportunity to talk to any of you. If you felt like you wanted to give me a call or send me an email, I'll do my best to be able to answer your questions or point you toward guidance going forward. Thanks very much.